Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. A couple of you mentioned you're just getting started with your LSAT prep. You're interested in seeing what Manhattan Prep is all about and how it compares to other test prep options for the LSAT. If you are interested in getting more of a sample after you finish the session with me today, there are a couple other things that you can do. One of my favorites is to try a free live LSAT class. So all of our LSAT courses are 10 sessions long, and you're welcome to come to the first session and sit in for free. No risk. It's just come in and you sit there for 3 hours and are a participant in the class and see what it's like to be one of our students. You also have the option to try our LSAT Interact resource for free. That is available on our website. And it's a really cool video feature that kind of has a comprehensive curriculum of material to cover the LSAT, but it has adaptive features. So it'll have you do a question like a logical reasoning question, and you'll put your answer in. And if you get it right, it'll give you one type of feedback. And if you get it wrong, it'll give you a different type of feedback. Lots of different ways to personalize your learning through Manhattan Prep, depending on what type of learner you are and whether you prefer to do something self-study related or in terms of sitting in on an actual course. Cool. Thanks, James. I will have to ask you to send me an email just so that I can make sure that I get your email address correct. If you don't mind doing that, I'll put my email back up at the end of class. Okay, so game plan for today. We are going to be living in the world of logical reasoning tonight. And in particular, our focus is going to be on what we call necessary assumption questions, which is a particular type of question that shows up on logical reasoning consistently and tends to be pretty challenging conceptually. So as we unpack this question type tonight, we're going to talk about the difference between necessary assumptions and their counterpart, sufficient assumptions. And we're going to talk about a particular tool that you can use to tackle necessary assumption questions, and that's called the negation test. We're going to start by kind of introducing the concept of a necessary assumption and use some simple drills to really help us understand, but then we'll be doing a few actual LSAT questions that feature the concept of necessary assumptions. Okay. Oops. So this is a pretty helpful breakdown of all of the different question types that you're going to see in logical reasoning. We have studied the frequency with which different formats or types of questions have shown up historically in logical reasoning and kind of broken it down. And we started by breaking it down into two big groups. So the first group we call the assumption family. And then there's a group that we call other, which has 4 kind of very distinctive question types. For all questions that are in the assumption family, there are some common features. One is that each of these is going to be an argument with a premise and a conclusion. And each of these questions, each of those arguments will have some sort of gap, some sort of flaw or a jump that's being made from the premise to the conclusion. So these arguments are never going to show up as something that is already logically valid. There's always something that you could add to them to make them better. And the LSAT will show you these problematic arguments and then ask you one of a variety of questions about that argument. So they might say, what is this argument assuming? They might say, what's the flaw in this argument? They might say, how could you strengthen this? Or how could you weaken this? Or they might say, what would be a principle that would make this argument work better? The area that we're focusing on today are these questions that are specifically assumption questions. The LSAT will ask you 2 different types of particular assumption questions, and those are the 2 that we mentioned before. They might ask you to find what's called a sufficient assumption, and they might ask you to find what's called a necessary assumption. The LSAT, as many of you are already figuring out, is a pretty tricky test. So they like to try to confuse people about the difference between these two types of assumptions. So that's what we're going to work on first in our lesson tonight, is what are sufficient and necessary assumptions, and how do you tell the difference between them. All right, so let's get started with that. So I'm going to cover up this question for just a minute so that we can just talk about, oops, let's use a white box, so that we can talk about the difference between sufficient and necessary assumptions. So I'm going to give you an example of an argument. It's a pretty simplified argument compared to what you might see on the LSAT, but it'll help us understand. So let's say that one of you has been offered a scholarship to law school. I'm going to pick Chloe for this law school scholarship. So let's say Chloe will go to whatever law school it is, we'll call it X law school, if she is offered a scholarship and she likes the location of the school. And so then that's our premise, that's the support in our argument. And then we're going to say our conclusion is Chloe will go to X law school, X being the same law school from the premise. So one of the things that the LSAT might ask us is, what would make this argument logically valid, or what would make this argument follow logically, meaning what would make it 100% true. So I'm going to ask you to tell me in the chat window, what would make this argument logically valid or 100% true? Cool, I see one answer so far. So again, the question is, what would make this argument logically valid? Like what's a sentence that we could say that would make it 100% true? Okay, so I see if she's offered a scholarship and she loves the location. Yeah, nice. I see you adding Chloe and she likes the location. Both of those things are important. So in order for us to answer this question, what would make the argument logically valid, we would have to say Chloe gets a scholarship and likes the location. This is an example of a correct answer to what we call a sufficient assumption question. So a sufficient assumption question is going to be phrased something like this: which of the following would make this argument follow logically, or be logically valid, or be properly concluded? And it's asking for something that is enough to make the argument 100% true. Chloe gets the scholarship and she likes the location is enough to make this argument 100% true. I noticed that Chloe herself initially had Chloe gets the scholarship, and then realized if we just have Chloe gets the scholarship, is that enough to answer this question? Would that make this argument logically valid? Not quite, right? It says she also has to like the location of the school. But what if we change the question a little bit? So I'm going to give you a new question. What if instead we say, what is necessary for the argument to be true? So let's say I take this answer, Chloe gets the scholarship. What is necessary for this argument to be true? I'd be interested to know if you think that Chloe gets the scholarship could be a correct answer to this second question. Would that answer work if we changed the question to what is necessary for the argument to be true? So yes or no, do you think that would work? Interesting. Okay, so I see a couple of yeses and I see a no. So the answer that the LSAT would give, I see a couple of no's. Interesting. The answer that the LSAT would give would be yes, that this would work for the question that I have down here. This question is asking for a necessary assumption. A necessary assumption is something that has to be true in order for the argument to even possibly work, but it doesn't necessarily make the argument 100% true. So if I say Chloe gets the scholarship and I were to plug that back in here, it doesn't make the argument 100% true. But if I say Chloe doesn't get the scholarship, this argument completely falls apart. The argument needs this to be true in order for Chloe to even have a chance of going to X law school, and that's why we would call it necessary. Yeah, so I see James bringing up kind of the formal version of what I was just describing, which is the negation test. So we'll talk about that in just a second. I'm just going to make a note off to the side. So for a necessary assumption, it's going to do what we call partially fill the gap. It has to be true in order for the argument to have legs to stand on, but it doesn't have to meet the same criteria that a sufficient assumption does of making an argument 100% true. One way to determine if something is necessary for an argument is what James is mentioning, called the negation test, which is where you ask yourself, if I negate this answer, what happens to the argument? So if I say Chloe does not get a scholarship, the conclusion falls apart. It is no longer true. Chloe is not going to go to X law school. That means that this is necessary. So the negation test says that if you're being asked for a necessary assumption, in particular, if you negate it, the answer falls, or the conclusion should fall apart. When you found the correct answer. This is not an intuitive concept. When we are asked to answer a question about an argument like this, we usually our instinct is to try to make that argument as good as possible. So when we see an answer like Chloe gets a scholarship, we're like, yeah, I mean, but you could do more to support that argument. And that's certainly true, but it's not the task that you're being asked to do when you're asked for a necessary assumption. Instead, the task that you're being asked to do is to find one thing that has to be true in order for your argument to possibly work. So I'm going to clear this off and give us another opportunity to work with this before we move into a proper LSAT question. So we're going to start with this argument. I'm going to block off this second question here. So before you read it, let me just point out a couple of things. So here you have the language of a necessary assumption question. This time they don't use the word necessary. They say, which of the following is an assumption on which the argument relies? So you'll know you're being asked for a necessary assumption when you see words like necessary, relies, or depends on, telling you that an argument needs something in order for that argument to possibly work. So I want you to take a look at these 4 answer choices and think about which of the 4 needs to be true in order for us to come to the conclusion that Charlie must be a cowardly person. I'll label them A, B, C, and D in just a moment, but go ahead and start thinking about it. And I see a few people already put in their answers in the chat window, so feel free to do that when you're ready. Okay, so it looks like we have a split between answer choices A and D. So we all agree that it's not necessary for Charlie to also be afraid of spiders and ladybugs. That's an answer choice that doesn't affect this argument. We would call it out of scope. We also agree that it doesn't matter that Charlie has been called cowardly in the past. That's a sort of real world type of argument that might help us make a decision about Charlie's character in real life. But on the LSAT, it's again outside the scope of this argument. The argument is just about scary movies and whether they make you a cowardly person. So what's the main difference between answer choice A and D? They both look good to me because I see scary movies, I see cowardly person. Okay. See James saying A is too strong. What's the language difference? Like if you're looking at the wording between A and D, what's the major difference in wording? Yeah, the major difference in wording between A and D is that A is talking about anyone and D is just talking about Charlie. So the question I have to ask myself is, do I need it to be true that anyone who's afraid of scary movies is a cowardly person in order for this argument about Charlie to work? Not really. I just need it to be true about Charlie. Maybe it's not something that's true for everybody in the world. Maybe it's just true for adults or people named Charlie. So answer choice D, though, if that's not true, if Charlie being afraid of scary movies doesn't make Charlie a cowardly person, then this argument can't work at all. So answer choice D is an example of a necessary assumption of the type that you might see on the LSAT. And as James mentioned, if I were to change this question and say, instead of asking you for a necessary assumption, I used language like this, which is asking for a sufficient assumption, then the correct answer would change. So this question is asking you, what could we say that would allow the conclusion to be properly drawn or valid? And when you're asked a question like that, your thought process changes a little bit. So I'm going to jot a quick note over here for anyone who's taking notes out there. For sufficient assumptions, some of the words that you'll see in the question stem are properly drawn, logically valid, and we'll ask you for something that will make the argument 100% true. For a sufficient assumption, the correct answer to this question would become answer choice A, or it could become answer choice A, I should say. Really, both answer choice A and answer choice D could work for a sufficient assumption, because if I were to plug each of these back in, I would have a valid argument. If I said, Charlie is afraid of scary movies. Anyone who is afraid of scary movies is a cowardly person. So Charlie must be a cowardly person. Yep, you can't really argue with that. But I could also say, Charlie is afraid of scary movies. If Charlie is afraid of scary movies, he's a cowardly person. So Charlie is a cowardly person. Yep, can't really argue with that. So one of the differences that this example illustrates is that for sufficient assumptions, it is okay for an answer choice to have very strong language, perhaps even stronger than is needed for the question. But for necessary assumptions, you want to be very skeptical of strong language, because it's often going a little bit beyond what's truly needed in order for that argument to work. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second because we've kind of covered a lot of big, heavy stuff, and give you an opportunity to ask any questions. So if you have a question or you'd like me to explain something with another example, take a moment to tell me in the chat window. Okay, I'll keep my eyes open for questions, but I'm not seeing any right now, so I'm going to go ahead and move us along. I just want to quickly note, so if you're working on studying this at home, you want to think about what are the different skills that I need to build in order to be successful with necessary assumption questions and sufficient assumption questions. So there are a few that we've seen already. The first is you want to build your question recognition. So can you read a question like the two written right here and identify what task you're being asked to do? Do you know the difference between a sufficient assumption question and a necessary assumption question? Can you recognize them amongst other question types on the LSAT? The second is you want to understand the concept of a sufficient assumption as it compares to a necessary assumption. So that concept of, does it fill the whole gap to make the argument valid? Or is it something that needs to be true in order for the argument? Okay, those are the two big ones. And then the third is the specific tool that you use for necessary assumption questions called the negation test. So if this is something that you're trying to master, those are three specific skills that you can work on. All right, so let's take a look at what this is like on the actual LSAT. I'm going to have you start with this question. So if you're new to the LSAT, for logical reasoning, the average amount of time that you're going to have to spend on a question is about 1 minute and 20 seconds. So you have somewhere between like 25, 26 questions to do in 35 minutes. And so that works out to be 1 minute and 20 seconds. Getting some time to practice in is something that's really important during your studying. So I'm going to give you about 1 minute and 20 seconds, and then I'm going to send out a poll for you to answer. And I will hop off the video while you all are working on this question so that you can concentrate and not worry about me, but I'll be back when time is up. Okay, you should have a poll popping up on your screen in which you can tell me what answer you would choose if you had to pick right now. Okay, thank you to everybody who polled in. So let's take a moment to go through this in the same way that we would want to go through it on the actual LSAT. So the first thing that I do on any logical reasoning question on the LSAT is identify what I'm being asked. In this case, I notice that it uses the language of depends. So it's asking me, what is an assumption that the argument depends on? The word depends is on that list that I gave earlier of words that indicate I need a necessary assumption. So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I want to pick a necessary assumption. I want something that has to be true in order for the argument to work. Well, to figure that out, I need to understand what the argument is. So every time that I'm doing any question that falls within the assumption family, I think about finding the conclusion and identifying what support there is for the conclusion. In this particular argument, can you tell me in the chat window what you think the conclusion is? Yeah, kind of a bummer, right? It's saying that the Tasmanian tiger is extinct. And this is kind of a rare LSAT argument where they start with the conclusion. They say these claims that it is not extinct are false. And then they also kind of circle back and restate the same thing. The Tasmanian tiger no longer exists. So they make it really clear, however you want to word it, the Tasmanian tiger is completely extinct. What is the support that they offer for that? How do they know that it's extinct? Yeah, they specifically tell us that the habitat was taken over by sheep farming, and they've discovered no hard evidence of its survival. So we'll say habitat taken by sheep farming and no hard evidence of survival, like carcasses or tracks. Great. So my job on this question is to find something that has to be true in order for it to make sense that the Tasmanian tiger is extinct. Another way to think about it is if I negate the correct answer, then it would show the Tasmanian tiger is possibly not extinct. As I look for answer choices, there are a couple of things that I can keep in mind to make my job a little bit easier and to help with process of elimination. One is that the correct answer to a necessary assumption question should make the argument stronger if we plug it in as it is. So if I have any answer choices that by themselves would hurt this argument, I can eliminate them quickly and focus my attention elsewhere. Take a moment to look through this list of answer choices, and if you see an argument or an answer choice that hurts the argument, just the way that it's worded, if we were to plug it in, it would be bad. Tell me in the chat window. Okay. See a couple of people saying B. I agree with that. If there are these scavengers who can destroy tiger carcasses without a trace, then that kind of puts some doubt in my mind, like, okay, you haven't found the evidence, but maybe there were some tigers and these scavengers just destroyed the carcasses, and so you don't know that they're there. So I would eliminate B as something that would potentially hurt the argument. I'm not sure that C would actually hurt the argument. If everyone has looked systematically for evidence of the tiger's survival, then that kind of sounds like they've looked really, really hard and they're still not finding this tiger, which makes it sound like maybe it's a little bit more likely that the tiger is indeed extinct. Yeah, that's okay. Another one I would say is answer choice E. Those who have reported sightings are not experienced naturalists. Kind of like casting a little bit of doubt on anybody who has said that they've seen one of these tigers, that like maybe their judgment can't be trusted. And so I think that, you know, if anything, that hurts the argument. So I'll go ahead and get rid of that. Notice how that nice, like fairly easy way of thinking about this eliminates two answer choices. So if we're under time pressure and we're having trouble deciding, at least we've narrowed our odds a little bit. Okay, so now I'm down to 3 answer choices. Another thing that I want to avoid, that I want you to keep in mind as we're looking through, is I want to avoid answers that just kind of reinforce the premise. So I want to avoid answers that sort of restate or reinforce information we've already been given. Do you see any answers like that? We call them premise boosters. Okay, I see a couple of people seeing A. I see C. Interesting. So I think A is interesting because it just restates some stuff about sheep farming and the Tasmanian tiger's natural habitat. It does introduce a new idea, though, of starvation. And so I don't know that I would straight up call it a premise booster because it's bringing in new information. I do agree that C is a premise booster. We have already been told that these naturalists discovered no hard evidence of the tiger's survival. And now C is coming in and saying, yeah, we've looked really, really hard and we haven't found any evidence of the tiger's survival. Okay, but I believed them the first time when they told me that they had no hard evidence of survival. So I'm not going to pick answer choice C. All right, so now we're down to the 2 answers that most of us chose, which are answer choice A and answer choice D. This is a great place to be on a necessary assumption question because this is your moment to use the excellent tool of the negation test. So as a reminder, the way the negation test works is I ask myself, what if this answer choice weren't true? For the correct answer, that should be like a huge problem for the argument if this answer weren't true. So let's think about it for our 2 remaining answer choices. So let's start with A. If I say sheep farming did not drive the last Tasmanian tigers to starvation by chasing them from their habitat, is it possible to say that this didn't drive them to starvation and yet they are still extinct? Could you think of any other ways that they could still be extinct even though sheep farming didn't drive them to starvation? Okay, yeah, maybe there was a harmful disease that the sheep brought and that killed the tigers. Maybe the farmers, the sheep farmers were hunting the tigers to protect their sheep, and that drove the tigers to extinction. So when I ask myself, does it have to be that they died off from starvation No, it just has to be that they went extinct. But that doesn't have to have happened through starvation. So answer choice A is not a necessary assumption. Hopefully D is, but let's check it out. So D says the Tasmanian tiger did not move and adapt to a different region. If I want to use the negation test, I would say the Tasmanian tiger moved and adapted to a different region in response to the loss of habitat. Okay, so they've looked for the tiger in this region and they couldn't find any evidence of it, so they came to the conclusion that it's extinct. If we just said, well, it went somewhere else, that would be a pretty big problem for this argument. It hasn't been accounted for at all in the premises, and it would totally throw off the conclusion that the Tasmanian tiger is extinct. That is what a necessary assumption looks like on the LSAT, and answer choice D is the correct answer. Take a moment to think about your process on this question and maybe jot down a takeaway. What do you want to remember about this? And let me know if you have questions. Tell me in the chat window if there's anything that you'd like to go over or if you're still not convinced. Okay. Let's give this a try with another question. Same deal. I'll give you about 1.5 minutes for this. Okay, you've got another poll coming your way. And tell me what you think the answer would be. All right, great, thank you. Okay. So it looks like we've got room for a little bit of debate on this one, just like the last one. I see some strong opinions there. Okay, so the first thing that we would want to do, as before, is break down this argument. And anytime there's some sort of comparison going on in an argument, I want to be really thoughtful about how I break it down and make sure that I'm attending to the details. So I know that I've got a necessary assumption question because it says the argument depends on, and I'm looking for the conclusion. In this case, I'm going to use this structure right here of since this, then that, to help me identify the conclusion. Since always sets up a premise. And what follows is typically going to be a conclusion. So since blah, 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 these results indicate mercury levels in saltwater fish are higher now than they were 100 years ago. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to prove. Mercury in these fish is higher now than 100 years ago. And the support that we have for that is going to come from that since part. We've got the mercury that accumulates in their feathers as the feathers grow comes from the fish that they eat. So mercury in feathers comes from the fish. And then I look back to see if there's any support elsewhere in the argument. I also see the recently taken from seabirds, stuffed and preserved in the 1880s, have half as much mercury as living birds of the same species. I want to be really careful about that comparison. Who's got less and who's got more? Can you tell me in the chat window who has less mercury in their feathers? Is it the modern birds or the old birds? Yeah, it's the old birds. Modern birds have more, okay? So the 1880s birds have less mercury in their feathers. So they've come to the conclusion that's because there's more mercury in the fish. More mercury in the feathers of birds today means more mercury in the fish of birds today. This question is a great one for us to think about something that comes up a lot on necessary assumption questions, which is thinking about alternative explanations. Oftentimes, a great way to harm an argument is to find a different explanation than the one that you've been given in the conclusion. And a great way to help an argument is to rule out different explanations, to say, no, those things aren't true. I see a couple of answer choices that address alternative explanations. If you see an answer choice that seems to be trying to explain an alternative reason that mercury in 1880s birds would be lower, can you tell me in the chat window? Okay, so I see B being brought up. Let's start by taking a look at that. The amount of mercury in a saltwater fish depends on the amount of pollution in the ocean habitat. Okay, that sounds relevant, and pollution does sound like it would possibly explain the amount of mercury in fish. The question that I then have is, well, the big comparison is birds today, birds in the past, fish today, fish in the past. Do we have any information about pollution today versus pollution in the past from this question? Yeah, we don't. And so this doesn't really help us. In order for us to use something to either strengthen or weaken this argument, it has to help us differentiate or apply to the differences between the past and the present. And because we don't know whether there was more pollution back then or more pollution today or the same, we won't be able to come to any conclusions based off of this particular answer choice that would be helpful. So I'm actually going to rule out answer choice B. And I'm going to point you to an answer that I think is about an alternative explanation. And that's one that a lot of folks chose, which is answer choice A. The proportion of a seabird's diet consisting of fish was not as high on average in the 1880s as it is today. So seabirds ate less fish relative to today's birds and more other stuff. If a seabird is eating less fish, what would you expect in terms of the mercury in their feathers? Yeah, less fish should mean less mercury, right? But that sounds a little different from the conclusion that they came to over here. They're saying today, the reason that these birds today have more mercury in their feathers is because fish today have more mercury in them. And answer choice A seems to be saying, nah, it's not really that. It's just that birds back then ate less fish. So they had less mercury. Maybe all the fish across time have had the same amount of mercury. Let's say there's 1, I don't know, milligram of mercury in every fish for all of time. But the average seabird ate 2 a day in the 1880s, so they got 2 milligrams of mercury. And today, the average seabird eats 10, so they get 10 milligrams of mercury. So answer choice A is an example of an alternative explanation to the conclusion. Answer choice A is saying it's not that the mercury in the fish is higher today, it's that birds today are eating more fish. An alternative explanation is bad for an argument. It hurts it. And because of that, we have to rule out answer choice A. So we're down to 3 remaining answer choices. Are there any that you can get rid of? Maybe you think they're out of scope. They're not gonna affect the argument. If you think you can get rid of one, tell me in the chat window which one and why. Okay. Yeah, C is something that we could definitely get rid of, I agree. Partly because it has the same problem that B had in that it doesn't differentiate between birds from the 1880s and birds from today. It's probably essential for both of them. Doesn't really tell us that much. Okay, so now we're down to D and E, and what I want you to try is using the negation test on those 2 answer choices to see which one of them would, if you negate it, would make the conclusion fall apart. Okay, James, I see you feel strongly about E. Sechu is saying D. Give me some reasoning. Tell me why. Why do you think that would make the argument fall apart? Okay, let's take a look. So if I take D and I say the stuffed seabirds whose feathers were tested for mercury were fully grown. Okay, now let me check and see, does it say anything about anybody being fully grown? We've got living birds. And then the old birds were fully grown. Well, the thing about this is I don't know if the living birds that they're testing are fully grown. If the stuffed seabirds were fully grown and the living birds were not, or vice versa, then we might start thinking about, okay, maybe a bird has just had longer to accumulate mercury in its feathers compared to the other group. But it doesn't actually tell us in terms of the living birds whether they are fully grown or not. So I can't decide whether this would help or hurt the argument or whether it would affect it at all. So the negation test shows us that answer choice D doesn't have a clear impact on the argument. So we try it on E and we say the process used to preserve birds in the 1880s did substantially decrease the amount of mercury in the bird's feathers. So this is giving us an alternative reason why these birds from the 1880s would have less mercury, which is the critical thing we're trying to figure out. Why do they have less mercury? The argument says it's because there's more mercury in fish today. But E is saying, no, there was just this thing that they did, and it would decrease the amount of mercury in their feathers. Well, if that's the case, that's an alternative explanation, and that would destroy the argument, which means we can't have this. We can't have this being true that it substantially decreased the amount of mercury in their feathers. We need it to be the case that it did not do that. So when we try the negation test on E, the argument falls apart, which means that we do need E to be true. It's a necessary assumption. Okay. So I want to wrap up with a couple of just big notes on necessary assumptions for you to think about. One is that, I'm just going to put them right here where we were doing our argument work. One is that necessary assumptions are difficult to predict. So when you first read this argument, if you thought about what the assumption might be, you probably, maybe 1 in 6 of you thought about the process of preserving birds, and other people might have thought about different issues that could have affected this argument. Necessary assumptions can kind of come from anywhere. There are often many of them that are needed in order to build an argument. It's often not worthwhile to try to predict exactly what we think the answer is going to be and then hunt for it, because more than likely we're not going to see the thing that we thought of, because the LSAT writers will just have thought of something different from us. So instead, you want to get comfortable recognizing what an alternative explanation looks like and using the negation test so that you'll know whether an answer choice is valid or not. All right. Nice work, everybody. I will stick around for a few minutes. If you have questions that you'd like to put in the chat window, then I can answer them for you. Otherwise, it's about time for us to wrap up. If you're interested in trying out one of our classes, remember that you can go to session 1 for free. You can check out our website for a complete schedule. We have both in-person classes in most major cities and then also online courses for those of you who aren't near one of our centers. And the online courses are live. They're just like this, except that you are also on video and you're able to talk and interact with your instructor. So it's really just as good as being there in person. My email, one more time, is abell@manhattanprep.com. If you have a question for me. We also have a great student services team that you can reach at lsat@manhattanprep.com if you have additional questions. Okay. If you don't have any questions, you are free to go. If you do have questions, I'll hang out for a couple of minutes and you can type them in the chat window. Thank you so much for coming and have a wonderful evening. Hope to see you again. Thank you. Great, thank you. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and end this meeting. If I'm cutting anyone short prematurely, please shoot me an email. Oh, there's somebody. Oh, gotcha. So I work for Manhattan Prep, and we do private tutoring, yeah. And I'm one of our private tutors, and we have online tutoring available for sure. If that's something that you're interested in, the student services team would be able to connect you.